Welcome students! In this video, we're going to teach you everything that you need to know to understand identity access management. As the web is increasingly used as a platform for unique applications, we are faced with new requirements for authentication, authorization, and identity management. Identity and access management is a framework of policies and technologies to ensure that the right users, in an enterprise for example, have the appropriate access to technology resources. But before diving deeper into today's topic, let's first explore some authentication concepts that we're going to be discussing during our video. The first one is identification. Identification occurs when a user claims or professes an identity. This can be accomplished with anything that can uniquely identify a subject, such as a username, a phone number, or a smart card. The next one is authentication. Authentication is the process of proving an identity, and it occurs when users provide appropriate credentials to validate their identity. For example, when a user provides the correct password for a specific username, the password proves that the user is indeed the owner of the claimed username. In short, the authentication provides proof of a claimed identity. The next one is authorization. Once the user has authenticated to certain resources, and we believe that we have identified them successfully, we now have to provide that individual with authorization to specific assets. This is the step that defines what rights and permissions they have to particular resources. Perhaps they belong to a certain group of users, and therefore that individual has certain rights and permissions available. Nowadays, the terms multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, known as MFA and 2FA for short, they're becoming more and more common. You would probably associate two-factor authentication with entering a username, a password, and most likely a 6-digit code sent to your phone via SMS to confirm your login request. But is it really just that? Well, authentication in general has 5 factors. Let's start with our first factor, which is something you know. A piece of information is classified as something you know if you store it in your memory and can retrieve it when needed. For instance, a personal identification number, an answer to a security question, or a password. For example, you can't debit any cash from an ATM without your PIN code. This PIN is something you know by memory, which grants the bank confirmation that you are who you claim to be, rather than a bad actor who's just looking to take out some cash under your name and has your debit card. Now let's move on to the something you have factor. This factor refers to the information that you can physically carry with you. For example, before you send money to someone, many banks will ask you for a token, which is also referred to as a one-time password, and it's usually 6 to 8 digits long. This token might expire after the first use or after 30 seconds. The token is usually generated by a device such as the RSA Secure ID, or depending on the bank, they might offer a mobile application that generates the token, such as the Google Authenticator app. We mentioned earlier that the token can expire after the first use or after 30 seconds. And there are 2 open standards that we use to make this happen. There's the HMAC-based one-time password, which we abbreviate as HOTP, and the time-based one-time password, which is abbreviated as TOTP. Essentially, HOTP generates a token that does not expire until the user uses it for the first time, after which a new token will need to be generated. TOTP generates a token every 30 seconds. If a user does not use it within 30 seconds, a new token will be automatically generated. Tokens are not classified as something you know because you don't know the token until you request to see one. Another example of this factor would be a personal identity verification card, also known as a PIV. PIV is a smart card that's used by the US federal agencies to identify the cardholder and grant them access to facilities and systems. As mentioned earlier, receiving a verification text to your smartphone with a code would also be considered something you have. Moving on to our next factor, which is something you are. Simply put, something you are is information that belongs to you as a person, which means it's a characteristic that only you and no one else has. That includes multiple biometrics methods, like your fingerprint, voice, face, and also some parts of your eye, such as your retina and iris. The only problem with this factor is that sensitivity controls the acceptance and rejection rate, which may affect the authentication accuracy. For example, in data centers, in order to access the server racks, you must pass a series of biometric measures, such as a weight measurement, fingerprint authentication, and running an iris scan. Next we have the factor somewhere you are. It would be safe to assume the factor somewhere you are is related to your location. One of the most common methods of detecting a user's location is via IP addresses and their geo-coordinates, which can be found using location services and satellite communication. For instance, suppose that you use a service which has security checks. When you configure your account, you might say that you live in the United States. If someone tries to log into your account from an IP address located in Italy, the service will most likely notify you that a login attempt was made from a location that deviates from your common login activity. That is extremely useful to protect your account against hackers. Lastly, our final factor, something you do. This is possibly the factor that is the least utilized, and the majority of users do not know about. Something you do is a type of authentication which proves identities by observing actions. These actions could be things like gestures or touches. Windows 8 users might know about a feature called Picture Password. This feature allows the user to set up gestures and touches on a picture as a way to authenticate themselves. If you have ever owned an Android before, you may be familiar that you can set up a sequence of swipes as your authentication method to unlock your device. In conclusion, as technology and cybersecurity advances, regardless if you work in the information technology industry, it is extremely important to be fundamentally knowledgeable on how to protect yourself virtually for your own safety. The 5 primary authentication factors which are widely recognized today are something you know, something you have, something you are, somewhere you are, and something you do. We hope that this video has helped you in understanding and differentiating between authentication factors.